Today's text comes from the book of Joshua, chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. In your Pew Bible, it is on page 172. Joshua chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Now, Jericho was shut up inside and out because of the Israelites. No one came out and no one went in. The Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have handed Jericho over to you, along with its kings and its soldiers. You shall march around the city, all the warriors circling the city once. Thus you shall do this for 6 days, with 7 priests bearing 7 trumpets of ram's horn before the ark. On the 7th day, you shall march around the city 7 times, the priests blowing the trumpets. Then they make a long blast with the ram's horn. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and all of the people shall charge straight ahead. So Joshua, son of Nun, summoned the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant and have 7 priests carrying 7 trumpets of ram's horn in front of the ark of the Lord." To the people he said, "Go forward and march around the city. Have the armed men pass on before the ark of the Lord." The word of the Lord. The Joshua battle in Jericho. As the choir sang during the offering, Joshua fit the battle of Jericho. What an amazing text. A text that can be seen from so many lights, a text that confirms what God has done. Joshua in the previous chapter had received word from the Lord saying, "I have given you the land and the city of Jericho. Dedicate all of the booty, all of the things that are collected, all of the gold, all of the silver to me, and eliminate all the rest." That's a hard text. To hear that God says to kill all the inhabitants, all of the animals, all of those things that are living, and yet to keep and to put into the temple archive all of the gold, silver, bronze, and valuables. Difficult words. But yet, as we see here, the battle of Jericho was just one of many battles. The people of Israel were given the land, the promised land. They journeyed 40 years in the desert. They went through a whole lot with Moses, and now that Joshua has taken over, they continue to go through many things, but they made it to the promised land. And though they made it to the promised land after going through the desert, they still must fight for what God has given to them. Just because the promised land was promised to them doesn't mean that they walk in and do nothing. But instead, they have to fight for the blessing that God has given them, for the land that God has provided, for the things that God has given to them. They still must struggle on to make it their own, to make it part of who they are, to make it what God has given to them. The battle of Jericho is just one battle. And I think when you consider the fact that the army of Israel, which was a decent army, and these were walls that were impenetrable, and they had sent in spies to spy out the walls and confirm that yes, it was impenetrable. How foolish does the army look walking around Jericho? I wonder, what did the people inside think? What were they considering? Were they thinking that maybe they were scouting the walls for some weakness? And if they were doing a bad job of it because the whole army was walking around the city. That's not a very good way to observe and to figure out ways to get inside. Normally it is under the cover of darkness. Spies may go in and understand where the weaknesses are. And they had gone in and saw that there were no weaknesses. So there was only one way to get inside. Either the doors were going to be open for them, which we know they weren't, or God was going to do something. And God said, walk around once a day for 6 days. And on the seventh day, walk around 7 times. And after you have walked 7 times, when you hear the ram's horn blown, shout at the walls so that the walls may come down. When you think logically, how foolish does that sound? How does it sound that if you shout at a wall, that it will come down? If you're looking from inside, those within Jericho, they probably have no idea, or they have no idea what's going on. These people are just walking around. And then suddenly they start yelling at the walls. How foolish are these people, they might have said. How foolish do they look? But yet, when God commands us to do things, we may think ourselves, or we may think it looks foolish. But yet God will do what God has to do. And the foolishness of them walking in circles, the foolishness of them yelling at the walls, what happens then? That what looked like foolishness brings down the walls of Jericho. It opens up what they thought was safe. It broke down the thing that they thought could never be broken down. It brought down the walls of a city that was called impenetrable. Worship unto God. The ram's horn blown in front of the Ark of the Covenant. The people worshiping and shouting for the Lord brought down the walls of one of the toughest cities of its time. The one of the most protected cities. Unable to get in with a normal army. It took God to act on behalf of the people. But now what does this say for us? This is just a story of people walking around a city and bringing down walls by shouting unto God. But what do we do now if God calls us to do something? To do something that may seem strange to others. To do something that may be strange to us. I don't think that the people of Israel saw this as something normal, to walk around the city. I wonder if they understood what was happening. But either way, they followed God's call. They followed Joshua, trusting that God had spoken to him, trusting that he was given insight that they did not know yet, trusting that though they may feel foolish walking around the city, not knowing how they're going to get in, or wondering, he must have gone nuts possibly. But they trusted and responded to the call. And after walking around 6 days, after walking 7 times on the 7th day, after hearing the horns blown, after shouting and praising God, and seeing those walls come down, they realized that it was God's call in their life. They realized that God had called them, and it was their response. It was because they accepted God's call, they didn't decline it, that they walked around this place. And what looked kind of strange was actually a blessing of God. What may have looked strange to those within was the thing that gave Israel the victory. The thing that they may have felt strange doing is the very thing that brought them closer to God and closer to the promised land that God had given them. It was because they responded to the call. How do you respond to God's call in your life? When God calls you, do you say, hold on? Do you decline? Are you afraid because I'm too old or too sick or too weak or not ready? When God calls you to do God's work, how do you respond to that? Better yet, how do you respond when God calls you to start working within yourself? For we all have built up walls. We live in a world that forces us to build up walls within us. Walls of resentment, walls that protect us, walls at work that allow us to function within the community there but not be influenced by what's happening or what may be happening. We live in a world where we build walls constantly within ourselves to protect, to keep what's ours, and to keep the things out that need to be out. But those walls aren't always of benefit, for sometimes we build walls of resentment. We build walls of jealousy. We build walls of things that are unnecessary in our life, but that continue to keep blessings out. If God has called you, God is calling you to break down the walls that prevent you from moving forward. God is calling you. God is ringing your phone. Are you willing to accept, or will you decline? Because sometimes faith may look foolish. Sometimes foolishness may be the only way we get to faith. Sometimes we have to take steps that seem insane to others. Sometimes we have to stand in front of tanks to stop, or at least to symbolically stand up against what is happening in the world around us and in the chaos within. For the thing about walls is not only does it keep things out, it also keeps things in. And if you've built up a wall of resentment, guess what's inside those walls? Resentment. If you built up a wall of distrust, guess what's living within that wall? Distrust. If you've built a wall of jealousy and envy, the only thing that lay within is jealousy and envy. So walls may help protect us from things coming in, but it also prevents things that are within us to come out. When we read the story of Jericho, is a reminder that God can break down walls, even walls that seem impossible to break down. But sometimes we may need to take a step of faith, a step that may look foolish to others, a step that we might consider foolish, maybe because of how it looks, like going around a city that is impenetrable, with an army that has no siege weapons to climb the walls, with an army that only has swords and shields, with an army that has the Ark of the Covenant going before it, but no way of getting in. And instead of trying to climb the walls, we walk around them. Sometimes when God calls us to do things, it may look foolish to others. But if God is calling us, it is time for us to do that. The walls within us, the walls that are restraining us, the walls that are keeping in those things, maybe it's time we start walking around those walls to break down the things that are preventing us from moving forward. The fear that causes you to not move forward. The fear that prevents you from taking a risk. The fear that prevents you from moving into what could be an amazing thing. Sometimes in order to take that leap of faith, you have to go outside the wall. Sometimes to take that step of faith, you have to step and walk around the walls in your life. And for us to get rid of those walls, of those fears, of the resentment, of the jealousy, of the envy, of all those things that are within us, we must walk around them. And like the people of Israel, praise God and worship God so that those walls may come tumbling down. But like the people of Israel, just because we are promised good things, just because we can walk around those walls within us, just because we can move closer to God, we can get rid of the envy and the jealousy and the pain and the hurt and the brokenness, can be healed once again, it does not mean that it will be easy. The promised land was promised to them. It was theirs. But this wasn't a fast food joint where they walk in and order and everything is hunky-dory. Instead, they walked in and had to fight step by step to take the land, to get the blessing, to receive the blessing that God had given to them. Not only did they have to journey through the desert, they also had to journey through the land, taking the blessing that God had provided them. God has blessed each and every person here. God has called each and every one of you here. God has promised each and every one of you a blessing. But it is not for you to sit back and wait and say, if it is meant for me, then it will be. God is calling us to stand up, to walk and to go towards our blessing, towards our promised land, to go and to reach out for our promised land, for our blessing, to go around the things that are within us to break them down, because if we get to that blessing, we may not be able to enjoy it because of the walls that are still standing within our hearts. So today's sermon is twofold. It's time for us to break those walls down within us. And it's time for us to get up and stop waiting and to go towards the blessing, towards the promised land. Stop waiting for it, for it's already there. It's already here. But it's time for you to get up and go towards it. It's time for you to get up and reach for it. It's time for you to do what God has called you to do. The walls must come down. We must break down all of those walls within us, for they are detrimental to our relationships with each other. They are detrimental with relationship with God. Those walls have stood for far too long. Your heart can't take the weight of those walls anymore. Today is the day that God has called to break down those walls. You may feel foolish, feeling like you have to walk around them. You may feel foolish, thinking that nothing will happen, but yet God has called you to bring those walls down. And if we bring those walls down, it is time for us to go in and reach for our blessings. It is time for us to be motivated. It is time for us to get up once again. For waiting is not bringing us the blessing, but getting up and walking towards will get us the blessing that God has for us. Are we willing to walk? Are we willing to take the steps? Are we willing to walk around those walls? Are we willing to break down those walls? When you've been living in the same way for so long, it is difficult to change. But yet, if you continue to do the same thing, change will never come. It is said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And most of us will say, that's an interesting definition, but it doesn't mean much to me. And yet we live our life the same way, day in and day out, expecting things to change, wishing things to change, wanting things to change, but never taking the steps to change them. Today is your day. Today is your day to change. Today is your day to break down those walls. Today is your day to allow God to come into your life in a way like God has never been there before. For the walls keep us and God separate. If we allow God in, if we allow those walls to be broken, our relationship, our intimacy with God will grow, and our blessings will multiply if we allow ourselves to get up and to change what we do and how we do it. God's blessings will be poured out upon us, and we'll be able to get to that next step. The walls won't come down by themselves. God is not a genie where we rub the bottle and say, I wish that these walls would come down. We need to put into action the things that God has taught us. Put our faith into action. Put our hope into action. Put ourselves into action. Changing how we've done things and expecting things to change. Not staying the same and expecting things to change. Today is our day for our walls to come down. Today is our day for the blessings to be poured out. Today is the day that God is calling each and every one of us here to stand up, to get up, and to move forward. To take our mats, as Jesus told the man by the pool of Bethsaida. Pick up your mat and walk. If the man stays laying there, he will never know that he was healed. If he doesn't pick up his mat, he will never know that he was okay to walk. It wasn't until he got up. Jesus could have said, get up and walk until he was blue in the face. But if the man never gets up, then he never realizes that he was made whole. And the healing that he had been praying for, struggling for, trying for, was done. Had he not gotten up, he would not have realized the blessing. Today, I invite you to stand up with me. I invite you to break down the walls with me. I invite you to praise God and let your worship bring down the walls of resentment, of distrust, of jealousy, of envy, of all the things that we have built up walls with. May we worship God and allow that worship to break down those walls so that we can truly live in the freedom that only comes from Christ. And in that freedom, may we rise up and may we go forward and reach for the blessing that God has given to us. Amen.